Right, I think we'll make a start. Good afternoon, everybody. There we go. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming along. My name is Matt McSpirit. I'm one of our technical product managers at Microsoft based in Redmond, and I'm joined by Mark Gosson.
Glad to stand between you and your dinner.
Between us, this session aims to give you a bit of information around how we can help you simplify migrations from a VMware platform to a Microsoft platform running Hyper-V. So we'll look at some of the tools that are available that you can use. Many of them are freely available, so you can start to use them and convert virtual machines at no cost. And we'll look at some of the partner solutions a bit later on and touch on those and how they can provide additional value as well. But before we get into the migration tools themselves, there's a couple of areas that I want to focus on and just help us understand who's doing this, who could I speak to if I wanted to learn a bit more about their experience of migrating, and then how I can get started before the actual physical migration takes place. What kind of things should I be thinking about in terms of that initial assessment of the infrastructure, assessment of my vSphere VMs before we start that migration process off? So when we think about who is migrating, there's been a number of what we'll call switchers who've switched their vSphere infrastructure for a variety of different reasons from vSphere across to Hyper-V. We do see a lot of organizations embracing Hyper-V in addition to a vSphere infrastructure as well, and managing and running a more heterogeneous environment, making use of the existing investment they've got in vSphere that may be still in license compliance for another couple of years, but running side by side a number of workloads on Hyper-V. And the tools and the stuff we'll go through today could help you move some of those workloads across to the different platform if that's what you're interested in. And in terms of some of those switchers, Pella are a good example of an organization running a number of virtual machines, a couple of hundred virtual machines that they wanted to switch across to Hyper-V. But it wasn't necessarily just about things like cost. Yes, it's a substantial consideration for a lot of organizations. Moving away from a vSphere infrastructure where you're paying for the hypervisor to a platform that's effectively built into Windows Server. The hypervisor is a free element. If you don't want to move towards Windows Server 2012 as an OS, then we make the Hyper-V server freely available. So either way, that virtualization layer with Microsoft is free. And with 2012 delivering many of the capabilities that organizations are looking for in their virtualized infrastructure. And in 2012 R2, that's going even further as we go forward. But for Pella, it wasn't just about the money. It was also about thinking how I can use the tools that surround Hyper-V, like System Center, to better manage my whole infrastructure. So using VMM to manage Hyper-V is one part, but using things like Ops Manager to monitor, using some of the other tools within System Center to gain greater insight into their now virtualized on Hyper-V infrastructure. But those tools, those System Center tools, could have played an equally valuable part in managing a vSphere infrastructure as well. For instance, Operations Manager with the Veeam Management Pack provides great visibility into vSphere hosts and virtual machines. VMM can manage the day-to-day operations of VMware-based virtual machines. There's a number of areas of value where System Center can sit on top of both, obviously, Hyper-V, but also vSphere. When we think about Domino's, a brand that many of you will be familiar with, 10,000 store servers switching to Hyper-V for increased reliability, performance. They're going to get a great level of service from Hyper-V at a much lower cost across a massive sized infrastructure for them. So that's a huge number of systems out there in their branches used to coordinate the creation and payment of those pizzas that are going out of the door. And they've got to handle some peak demands. Think about Super Bowl Sunday here in the US. There's a lot of demand for pizzas on that day. And their systems have got to be ready to react as quickly as possible. And again, System Center was called out to centrally manage those stores across the globe, across their infrastructure. And we think about a couple of others, Apartments.com. They've got to be competitive in their business. And for them, lowering costs was important. That VMware-based infrastructure that they had maintained over a period of years, they felt was too inflexible to meet the needs of their DevOps environment in particular. But with Hyper-V and with the System Center tools integrating into tools like Visual Studio, they had much more of a compelling offering for their development team to utilize this shared infrastructure that they could provide. And then finally, Acer. It comes down to cost in this example. $600,000 a year that they think they'll save by switching to Hyper-V. So costs that save across all of their global data centers could be 5 times higher. So System Center is a key driver, costs are key drivers, You may have your own drivers within the customers you work with or within your own environments yourselves. But people are starting to switch. Now that Hyper-V's got to that level in 2012 where it's delivering all of those key capabilities and System Center's now available to manage it, which is great. But how do I get started? Should I just jump in and start picking machines off and migrating them over? What kind of approach can I take? What kind of tools can I utilize to help make my life a little bit easier in assessing what's going on? And the first tool that we want to talk about in the presentation is something called the Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit, the MAP Toolkit. Now, this is a free download. Anybody can have it. It's been around for a number of years. We're actually up to version 8 now in this release, with 8.5 beta, which I'll show in a second, just been made available for download if you do want to test that one. But what it's effectively providing is an agentless mechanism to go out and scan your infrastructure and provide you back information about what's in your environment relating to migrations. And we're going to focus, obviously, on VMware migrations at this point, but what if I want to upgrade from an older version of Windows on the client to Windows 8? Is my hardware suitable? Well, I can assess that hardware with MAP. What are some of the other things that I can assess as well? Well, let's take a quick look in my environment.
Yeah, in fact, MAP's been around so long that VM migration is the last element that was added to it. So up until a year and a half ago, it didn't even have this aspect in. So
exactly.
This tool's a very well used and been around tool. So.
And if we look on this overview screen here within MAP, so all I've literally done, I've downloaded, I've installed. It installs a local SQL Express database as well as part of that. And you'll see I've got a number of scenarios that are available. Cloud, desktop, so are my machines ready for Windows 8? Am I ready for Office 2010 or Office 2013? What else have I got? Servers. Can my physical servers run Windows Server 2012? So I've got to think about this migration process. Can my physical servers that I want to use for these new Hyper-V hosts, are they suitable to run Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V? So this is a useful checkbox exercise to scan that infrastructure. Remember, it's agentless, so there's nothing to lay down inside those inventory items. You just literally run it from a single source, let it run for a period of time. There's scenarios around desktop virtualization. Is it going to work for my environment? I'm going to collect metrics about my users and my status at this point in time and then work out whether I can move to session or VDI-based infrastructure going forward. But here's the one we're focused on, and it's this server virtualization scenario. You may be thinking, well, actually, I might work with customers. I'm a partner. I may work with customers who haven't virtualized at all yet. And you may just need a capacity planning tool to scan, check out the low-hanging fruit, and get a list of all the physical servers in there and their utilization. And you can then decide which physical servers are going to be best to migrate first. But where we're specifically going to focus today is in this VMware migration scenario. Because that's a specific scenario in the server virtualization scenario group where I can go through a series of steps. The first one being I need to go out and collect the inventory data. So remember, it's going to go out, it's going to talk to the vSphere hosts out there. It's going to query through its standard interfaces, get the information about the hosts, the hardware, the VMs running on there, all of the different bits it can gather, including the utilization, and bring that back. So it's going to collect inventory, it's going to collect performance data. I can then start to utilize hardware configurations. So I can specify, perhaps I'm moving to new hardware, and I've just spec'd up this new hardware. I can put that hardware configuration in here, and it will tell me, based on the VMs that I'm going to migrate, how many I can run per host, how many is going to be an optimal number to run on a particular host, based on the spec of hardware that I'm plugging in here. So they're just some of the kind of things that we can start to look at using the MAP tool. And it's going to give me a lot of information about my infrastructure, but it's lightweight and it's free, so it's great and easy to get started. However, let's have a look at some of the sample reports that pop out of the end of MAP once we have run it. And if you want to see some of the sample reports for yourselves across all of the different areas, from instance Windows 7 upgrades, Office 2013 assessments, they're all in there. So you can download some sample reports with the MAP download. But if we scroll down here to the VMware assessment, you'll see there's a VM report, there's a VMware assessment spreadsheet, and there's a VMware assessment proposal. I just want to open up the assessment. And what you'll see in here, if I make this a little bit bigger, you zoom in. Here we go. So if I scroll across one of the rows here, and I go to the overview first, you'll see it's fairly simple. It's scanned the infrastructure. it's inventoried what we've got from a vSphere perspective and found we've got one vCenter, 7 hosts, 81 VMs, and now it's telling me specifics around those VMs we've identified could be migrated successfully with the tool that we're going to talk a bit about later on, so our Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter. So it's going to give us that information right up front. So I know straight away of the 81 virtual machines, 37 are good to go. 14, I need to make a few tweaks. 30 of those VMs we're not going to be able to convert. And it's going to give me not only the host details of those vSphere hosts, in this case it's 4.1, but later versions are also supported and scanned, but it's going to give me information about the VM in question, the host it's running on, the migration for using MBMC, and why in this particular case it can't be migrated, or the changes that are needed to be made. So in this case, migration recommended for this VM is you need to make some changes. The changes are we need to install VMware tools inside that VM. But there may be others that actually we can't migrate because it's an operating system that's not supported. Cannot migrate this particular VM because the virtual machine is running an OS that's not supported to be migrated with MVMC. But at least straight away up front, I'm getting a quick view of my infrastructure and I can understand these are going to be candidates, these aren't. But beyond that, then I can start to look at the performance metrics that MAP's going to give me back to say, well, these VMs that can be migrated are running really hot quite a lot of the time. So maybe I start with the lower hanging fruit first. Okay? So that's some of the stuff that it generates. But if you're looking at building more of a business case around this and you don't want to write a big proposal, then the sample documents, the documents that it pops out of MAP, also give you quite a nice looking document, quite a fairly professional produced document that you can edit, brand with your own logo if you were a partner, or if you were presenting this back to the internal decision makers in your environment. And you'll see there's a bit of blurb about why Microsoft and Hyper-V is great. Inevitably, you're going to get that in the document. But the assessment results are where it starts to get very useful. So it's taking that raw data in that spreadsheet and presenting it forward. So we get an idea of what kind of hypervisors we've deployed. Not a particularly interesting pie chart when it's just one host type. Might be a bit more interesting if we had a few different types of hosts. But then we start to look at the kind of processors we've got in those hosts, number of cores and so on. But then we start to see the VMs on the platform. How many we found? How many can be migrated? And what you'll notice here is it's actually giving us information, and there's more information in the doc as well, but it's listing 2 toolkits here we could use to migrate. The MVMC on the right is the one we're going to focus on today, a bit later on. That's going to be Microsoft's go-to-market migration tool that we're going to focus on. The VMMT, the Virtual Machine Migration Toolkit on the left, was available in market for a while, but now we're moving forward with MVMC. Okay, so that's the one you would focus on. So MVMC, you'll see it's identified here, ready to migrate. There's some, we need a couple of changes, but some can't be migrated for whatever reason. But we'll look into that a bit later when we look at MVMC. So hopefully that's just given you a quick insight into how we can actually start to assess a vSphere infrastructure, which is very useful, particularly if you've got a big vSphere farm to migrate across. If you've only got a handful of VMs and you're pretty knowledgeable about what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, maybe you don't need that kind of assessment, but it's certainly very, very useful. And don't forget, the migration elements of it, the VMware migration assessment, is only one part. Like I said, it's got the Office upgrade, it's got the Windows readiness for hardware, all of that sort of stuff as well. So very, very useful, and it's free. So how can I then get going? How can I then start the migration off? Well, if I've got an investment in System Center in my environment, then I could just use that. But we realize that some organizations want to just test the water with Hyper-V, move a couple of their vSphere VMs across, and not need a full System Center infrastructure to do that. And if that's the case, then we'll look at some of the tools that enable us to do that in a little while. But let's start initially with those who have got an investment in System Center, or will have when they deploy Hyper-V perhaps. Because with VMM, there is in the box, and I'll show this in a demonstration in a minute, a virtual-to-virtual conversion, which is going to walk me through the conversion of a VMware VM to a Hyper-V VM in the box in System Center Virtual Machine Manager. But there's a couple of key tips that we want to make sure you take away if you're going to use this. The first one is, first, before you do the migration, you remove the VMware tools from the VM. It is a lot easier, and we'll talk a bit later on about why that's a lot easier. But at this point, that's important. We remove the VMware tools from the VM, then we start off the conversion. Okay? The VMs will be on a host, and they'll be in an off state, or they can be already in the VMM library. Don't forget that VMM, as a System Center tool, can manage Hyper-V and vSphere. So it is already going to have visibility of these VMs at the start. Okay? It's easy steps, and we'll go through this in a sec. So we select a host, select network, so we line all this up. We finish. We generate a PowerShell if we want to utilize PowerShell, and we're good to go. So let me just flick over to my environment and show you what this looks like in the real world. So here we are inside VMM. So if you've not seen it this week, I'm sure you will see it for the remainder of the week. I'm sure you've already seen it. But this is VMM 2012 SP1. So this isn't the R2 that we've been previewing this week. All I need to do to utilize the V2V wizard is create virtual machine, convert virtual machine. Now it asks me and says, well, do you want to convert virtual machines created with other virtualization technologies to ones that are compatible with Microsoft virtualization? But when I go into the browse, it's only going to look for VMware virtual machines. So I'm not sure why I didn't just say that in the text, but there you go. So we'll go to browse. I'll choose some of my VMware virtual machines. It knows they're running on ESXi in this case. So we'll go OK. And now I can start going through the Convert Virtual Machine wizard. But remember, at this point, I should have already, A, probably taken a backup of the VM just in case, and B, or a snapshot, and B, remove the VMware tools. Okay, so I'm assuming I've done that already. So I'll go next. I can specify the processors and the memory for the new machine. Now, I don't have any options, unfortunately, at this point to reflect dynamic memory, if I was perhaps using memory overcommit in the VMware version. But I can go back once I've finished the creation, and I can update that if I need to. But I'm going to go next. I'm going to select a host of where I'm going to place this VM. And you'll see right at the top, I've got one host that's going to be suitable. The rest of my hosts, the ESX ones, aren't suitable because I'm not going to be able to migrate a ESX VM to Hyper-V and then run it on ESX. That's not going to work, so no stars for that, surprisingly. And some of my other hosts, they're not suitable because they perhaps don't have enough resource available to run this particular VM. But this one's right at the top. Intelligent placement is saying this is the one you should choose, so I'm going to go with that. I'm not going to argue with VMM. So where am I going to put this virtual machine? Where am I going to put this migrating VM? And I'm just going to choose a location, local storage in this case, just using DAS storage. But if you've got SAN or whatever, you can choose those. We'll go next. Now, if I've got vSwitches that I've configured in the VMware world and they're attached to the VMware virtual machine, I'm going to want to make sure that when this VM migrates over, that it's dropping onto the right network in the Hyper-V world, so reducing downtime as much as possible. This is a migration that is cold. The VMs are off, so there is downtime. But I want to get them back up and running as quickly as possible and reducing the amount of configuration. So before you start all of this migration stuff, make sure that you utilize and configure the VM networks so that your Hyper-V and vSphere VM networks line up from a naming and a connectivity perspective. So you may have to do a little bit of work in configuring and understanding how your VMware vSwitches match to your Hyper-V network switches. Yes? Great question. Does the VM need to be offline when you're converting it? Yes, this is an offline conversion, so the VM would be powered down at this time. Okay?
All the tools, all the Microsoft tools we'll talk about today will have that caveat.
We will touch on some tools at the end from partners that do offer a more warm migration, but there's no live migration that we know of anyway. The question at the back there? Good question. So are we able to read all of the switch stuff from VMware and provision that in VMM? When you bring vCenter into VMM's management, and your ESXi hosts come along with that when you bring those in, it looks at your networking configuration from your ESXi hosts that it pulls from ESXi and from vCenter, and then you can map what VMM terms logical networks and these VM networks onto those. So then you can create that unified configuration. So yes, we see what you've got already, but VMM wants to apply almost terminology over the top So our term of VM networks doesn't really exist in vSphere. It's almost like a label, if you will, but those labels need to line up to express and reflect that connectivity. So yes is the answer to the question. So I'm going to go next, and then I'm at the end of the steps now. That PowerShell script is right there. So if you're a bit of a PowerShell guru, or maybe if you're not and you want to learn, this is a great way of starting to get on board with what's going on under the covers in VMM. So I can take this, I could make it a repeatable action and start to scale this migration out to an extent within VMM. So something to be aware of.
And that's a fairly simple example. I mean, if you had 5 NICs in there, that would be a much bigger script because it goes through and iterates each of the interfaces and then creates a...
And I would click create then. It's going to go through the rest of the steps. It's going to convert the disk using its technologies within VMM and then bring that virtual machine up if I want to start it or just leave it offline as a new Hyper-V VM. But remember, it doesn't destroy the source. So if you do want to just spin up that VM back on vSphere, just apply your snapshot that you took earlier in terms of the one where the VM tools were still present and then start it back up again. So that's a choice you've got. So I'm going to cancel out of there. But there is one more conversion technology within VMM that I could use. Because VMM here relies on that VM that I want to convert already being aware to VMM. So VMM's managing vCenter, it's managing your ESXi host, it can see the VMs, so it's got to have a visibility of it already. So what if your admins, your vCenter admins, don't want you to connect your VMM to their stuff? How are we going to get to the VMs to convert them? And that's where we could use the convert physical machine option. So yes, we're converting a VM, but it's still just a Windows OS at the end of the day. So we pointed at the IP address or the DNS name of the VM that's running on vSphere, and we can convert it that way. So we go through this wizard, treating it as if it was a physical machine. At the end of the day, we don't convert the hardware. We convert the OS that's on the hardware. So something to be aware of. And one little other bit that you should be aware of, going back to that convert virtual machine option, VMware can boot from SCSI. There's a little note inside the wizard on Hyper-V that we boot from virtual IDE. So it will automatically sort that out as part of the process. If you notice and wondering what was going on there. So that was a little bit in terms of VMM.
I'll just add to that. You mentioned sometimes VMware admins don't want you to have access via VMM. So the other thing you could do is export the VM directly to the library, and it'll show up as an asset there, and you can convert it from there too. So I think the physical route's probably quicker, but it's another option.
Okay. VMM will only focus on through vCenter. So that's how it manages. But we'll look at some of the tools a bit later on about how you can start to do these things directly, without a need for vCenter. Can you resize the disks? I don't believe I had the option to resize the disk. It will take like for like as part of the conversion process. On the V2V, if you were doing a P2V of that, then it would allow you to do that. Yes. Yeah, the RAM, the CPUs, that kind of stuff could change, And when it gets to Hyper-V, on the other side, you could make some adjustments to the disk at that point if you wanted to increase, Or with 2012 R2, decrease while it's online as well. So how could I take that a little bit further? How could I automate that in a little bit more of a granular way? I've got that PowerShell output that we saw there, but that's still quite raw. I'll have to take that. I'll have to apply some of my knowledge and IP and understand how I can utilize that in a more scaled way. The alternative to that is start to integrate Hyper-V and VMM with Orchestrator, another component within System Center, where I can build powerful runbooks that effectively do a lot of the tasks, but on a faster scale. So we've got partners now around the world who are using that combination of VMM and Orchestrator as their conversion strategy to work with customers. So they've built these runbooks for their own usage, using them with customers to help them migrate. But if you want to do it inside your own environment, the runbooks are there. You can start to build those to actually handle the conversion. And you know a thing or two about Orchestrator, don't you?
A bit.
So that was a little bit about System Center. So you can use it. It's part of System Center, but System Center isn't free. So if you wanted to test the water with migrations from vSphere to Hyper-V and you were just evaluating everything, you could obviously pull down the eval of VMM. But if you want to do this in a more aggressive way, then System Center would be a purchase that you'd have to think about making. The Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter, however, is something that's free. Now, MVMC is a supported, free, easy way to convert VMware virtual machines to Microsoft VMs without the need for System Center. Okay, so this is, again, similar to the map tool we used for assessment earlier on. In this example, this is a tool to actually do the conversion. It's an engine to get things from A to B. It's easy to install. It's very small in terms of footprint, a couple of megabytes. It will convert up to Hyper-V in 2012. So it will convert VMware VMs to run on Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V, but it won't convert 2012 VMs. Okay, so if you've got a guest OS of Windows Server 2012 on top of vSphere already, it won't convert those. Okay, but there are no vSphere hosts or platforms that are certified by VMware to run 2012. There are compatibility is there, so I can run Windows Server 2012 in a vSphere 5.1 VM, but VMware haven't gone through our server virtualization validation program yet for any of their newer hypervisors to run 2012 as a guest. So it would work, but we don't support that just yet. But either way, MVMC doesn't support 2012 being converted as a guest operating system today. Okay? Great question. What about non-Windows operating systems as well? Today, MVMC wouldn't convert Linux, and if you did that assessment that we saw earlier on, that was one of the ones where it said incompatible operating systems. So
we've got a whole slide on what is and isn't actually coming up.
So it's very focused on the core Windows operating systems at this point. And it's scriptable, and we're going to learn a lot more about that very shortly. And there we go. In terms of OS support, 2008 R2, 2008 WinServer, 2003 SP2. So it goes quite far back, but also Vista and Windows 7 if you did want to do some of the desktop side of things as well. But it's more, I think, more likely going to be used to P2V servers rather than desktops, I would have imagined for the most part.
Yeah.
So what does it do essentially? Well, it converts VMware VMs to Hyper-V. We've said what it supports in terms of conversion up to the platform of 2012 Hyper-V. Obviously, it's not going to support 2012 R2 Hyper-V anytime soon. But then the preview bits are only going to be made available to you at the end of this month, and it won't be supported. However, you could convert to a 2012 host, and that VM will run fine on 2012 R2, so no worries there. It's a wizard-driven, and we're going to see a demonstration shortly, but it can be programmatically utilized, and we're going to see more of that towards the end as well. If you want to do an offline conversion of just the disks, just the VMDKs to VHDs, we're good to go on there. But the nice thing about this, as opposed to what we saw with VMM, is it will remove the VMware tools for you. So it's part of the process. It handles that bit of the process, which is good, because that means it's a much more clean migration. The last thing you want when you get to the other side is to be diving around in services and starting and stopping things and removing services and trying to find different VMware components to remove because they're now no longer running on a VMware host. And it will install the ICs that Hyper-V needs if it's an older operating system as well. So do you want to talk us through just how this stuff magic works?
Yeah, so as Matt said, the MVMC is purpose-built for conversion. Unlike MAP, which does maybe 80 other things, all it does is move one thing to another. So, and I'll give you a full demo of this, but just to understand kind of at a high level what's going on here. So the first step, and this is using the UI, and it's UI-driven, so it's very nice and handy to use that way. First thing is we need to figure out which VMware environment we're going to use. So that can be an ESXi host, an ESX host, or vCenter.
Yep.
You know, any of those are fine.
So to go back to the gentleman's question before, it can go
this
direct.
One will touch all three.
Yep.
Once we figured out where the source is, we need to figure out which VM we want to convert. And so, again, you'll see in the UI, I pick a VM, and assuming it's valid, and the UI will actually do the validation for us to make sure that the ones that are selectable are, in fact, convertible.
And there's a key difference here, isn't there, at the moment, because these VMs are on.
These are all on at the moment.
Yeah, but with VMM, they would be off to start.
They're going to be off in a second anyway. And then, of course, we need to tell it where it's going on the Hyper-V side, so we need to pick out a Hyper-V destination. But once you've got all that done, and that's kind of I guess you can think of it as the management layer here, those are all things that you're going to do manually, just like we did with VMM. Click through, pick the ones you want. And then the conversion starts, and this is where kind of the engine takes over. So the first thing that MVMC does is take a snapshot. In case something goes wrong.
So it triggers a VMware snapshot.
Yeah, so VMware is going to take a snapshot of that VM in the state that it's in, just in case something goes wrong. Generally, nothing's ever gone wrong, but it's there
in
in case something does.
Just in case.
The next thing that'll happen is we want to get those, now that we've got a saved copy, we want to get the VMware tools off. And as Matt alluded to, VMware tools are kind of a funny thing. Just like our Hyper-V integration, they're critical to being able to operate properly and be managed under VMware. So, and if you've ever used VMware, and I assume most of you have, you know that you can right-click or select a bunch of them, right-click, upgrade, install tools. Uninstall, not so much in the UI or anywhere ever. It just doesn't exist. They really don't want you to remove them for the obvious reasons.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's no point. Yeah,
we understand.
They're optimizing the performance and the usability of that guest OS on vSphere. Yeah.
Right, but in the case, so we're doing this, we're going to uninstall them here, but it's critical to do that. And just like with VMM, you need to do it. And I actually have, and I'll put up the links later, but I've got a blog in the blogosphere. I'm known as Migration Mark. I've got blog entries on how to remove those tools to make it a little easier for you.
If you were using the VMM method.
If you were using VMM or some other, there's a lot of other ways you might get this done.
Yep.
But the trick is to do it once it's on the VMware side, which is kind of counterintuitive because you're using the management stack to remove management, at the end of which you don't really have management. So it's kind of a weird way to do it. But if you don't, you'll end up with, assuming it even boots, a VM on the Hyper-V side that has VMware tools. And even if you try to uninstall them then, if you can figure out how to do that, first thing it does is go, you're not my hypervisor, you're not my mom, and walks away. So it won't even uninstall at that point, and you'll just have to go bit by bit and delete everything, and it's a huge pain. So make sure that you're getting them out.
You've got a lot of VMs to do.
Yeah, you want to do it beforehand so that it's a lot easier. Anyway.
But MVMC does this for
MVMC does it for you. You don't have to worry about anything. It just goes in there and scrubs it. And that's really one of the reasons that, at least initially, it hasn't supported Linux is that's a different process in Linux, and this version didn't do that. So it's really more that than anything else.
But you're not alluding to anything future-wise, eh?
I wouldn't know.
No.
They don't pay me enough to know that. I do know why it didn't work.
Right.
So then the machine's going to have to go offline for the conversion.
Yep. So again, it's a cold migration.
We power it down.
Same as it was before.
And then it's actually going to take a copy to what we'll call the conversion machine here, for lack of a better term, but the machine where you're running the GUI.
So you might want this machine to be fair, have a decent amount of disk space?
Yep, that'd probably be a good plan. I mean, if you're doing one at a time, at least that much.
Yeah.
But certainly more down the road. And then we do the conversion. So just like VMM, the disk geometry switch and all that happens here. And then what you come out with on the other side is a VHD. And that gets copied out to a share on the Hyper-V side, where Hyper-V is going to take that, basically wrap a container around it. And here, you're not prompted for how much RAM do you want to use. It just takes however much it had. Everything that it had comes forward. You can change it later, but it automatically reads it from the VMX files, pulls all that out.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it does it through VIX, but either way. All that's read in, and then we build up a new VM, drop the disk in there, and you're up and running, assuming you want to be. You actually have an option here as what state, the final state you want both of those VMs in, so the source and the destination, they can both be off. One can be on, or they could both be on. I mean,
you probably wouldn't put both on.
You shouldn't, but the options, it's completely flexible. So however you want to make that work, it's up to you. And then it comes back on, one or the other, and we're good to go.
Excellent.
Conversion complete.
Nice.
Achievement unlock. So, all right, let's talk about the supported configurations just quickly, since we had a couple of questions. We've kind of gone through some of this already,
but yeah, just to reiterate. So you've got it as a reference.
Which guests do we support? So Matt read them off before, but you see they're basically 2003, Vista 7, and then Server 2008 in all of its many flavors. Mm-hmm. Which machines can I use to convert this? So
these are where you would install MVMC?
This is a pretty lightweight tool. So you can run this on Windows 7. If you're just doing a handful of them, that's probably a perfectly fine way to do this.
As long as you've got a bit of disk space.
Yeah, otherwise you probably want to go to server, and that's what we tend to use.
And would having an SSD speed things up?
A bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the network copy that also kind of slows us down, because we've got to get the bits off their side and over our side. So what sources can we use? So again, so there's some restrictions here. It's 4.1 or 5.0, vSphere, ESX, ESXi. So what about 4.0? Well, not supported, but as long as you can stand up vSphere 4.1 instance in there, you can manage 4.0
so
with
a
4.1.
vCenter 4.1 managing a vSphere 4 host.
4.0.
Yeah.
And likewise, if you can put a 5.0 up inside of a 5.1 environment, you could probably get away with that. But supported-wise, it's 4.1 and 5.0, but that's really where the bulk of things are at the moment.
Yeah.
And then all the disk types that are supported there, I'm not going to go through them all. They're just there as reference.
What was that, sorry? Raw device map? It won't do RDMs, no. It wouldn't. The equivalent of a pass-through disk, no. It would have to. The conversion is really focused on a VMDK.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And then which destinations are supported? So there again, Server 2012 or 2008.
Yep, and they're both Windows Server 2012 with the Hyper-V role, or that free hypervisor Hyper-V server if you were using that.
And you covered IDE and SCSI, so
yep.
It's making that conversion again, and either fixed or dynamic if you're using the disk conversion option, which is a separate exe inside of there.
Yep. So in the VMware world, it would be you've got your eager zeroed, but you've also got your thin disks.
Yep.
Microsoft is fixed and dynamic or thin VHDs. What was that, sorry? The shared virtual disk. Good question. Is the shared virtual disk supported in ESX? We'd have to check. I'm not sure why it wouldn't, but then going over to Hyper-V in 2012, there's no equivalent to that. But in 2012 R2, there is. So it might do the conversion, but then when you got there, you wouldn't be able to share it between two VMs on the Hyper-V side. So something to be aware of. Well, for that particular feature, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that would be in R2.
Okay, so this is the MVMC UI, and you see it reminds you of some of the things we just talked about, what versions are supported and all that. And the first thing you need to do, as we said, is configure your source. So in this case, I put in the destination for my 48 is my ESX host. Directly,
yeah.
And then my username and my extremely complicated and uncrackable single-digit password. And I did this already. This generally takes a second just to pull in all the data, but I did it earlier just to cache it out.
That probably wasn't a best practice, was it? That wasn't one of the, having a one-digit password, yeah.
For demos, I say it is.
Right, fair enough.
The odds of me screwing that up are a little less than
between
highly complex
0 and 9.
But what we see here is a couple items that have, what is that, the information sign. That's kind of the warning that that's not going to work. And if you see the naming there, hopefully you maybe already understand why that is. So one of them is sent. So that's not going to work, as we said, because Linux isn't supported. One of those is a template and not a VM. So, okay, that makes fair game. That's not going to work. And this one down here has no tools on it, and so that's not going to work. Again, because tools allow us to manage the machine via VIX and through Power CLI and whatever. So without the ability to do that, we can't talk to it and get it to do the things we need. So
just to focus in on that template. So whilst MVMC won't convert the template as VMware stores it, you could deploy a VM from template on vSphere.
Oh, sure, yeah.
We could convert that, and then if you use Virtual Machine Manager, VMM will then create a template from that gold image, if you will. So it would be a couple of steps, but you would end up with VMM and Hyper-V specific templates there. So it would take that same configuration, but transform it into a VMM template. But you would need System Center for that.
And you can see here just some of the other values that it's bringing in. So I said it knows how much space is used by this, how much memory is used, how many CPUs, and the OS. And so all that's being taken into consideration. In fact, the two teams worked together, and when MAP created that report, it was based on exactly the same data that they're using here to determine whether or not it's valid. And then it's going to go out to the virtual machine, the hypervisor, and connect. Oh, wait, sorry, this is just the details. So here, it's offering to use my Windows account. What we do to remove VMware tools, again, there's no easy way to do this. And so, as I said, we basically, I don't think even in the latest versions of Hypervisor we provide this, but VMware has a conduit which I can send a command straight to the guest. And we're using that to uninstall the guest. So what you need is rights to the guest in order to do that. And so I would need to give, since this is a domain that I am not a member of, I would need to assign that. And that's going to be someone who has basically admin rights at the host level so that it can issue that command, because that's an admin function, obviously, for good reason. And then what are the final states of the source and destination? I'll just leave them both off for now. It's going to validate that. Nice, so that you don't make the mistake. Where do I want to store this? Again, locally on the converting box. Where do I want to make that conversion happen? Right here. So we'll do dtemp. And then finally, which hypervisor do I want to use. So I will use...
So which Hyper-V host specifically do I want to move?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, move this to this VM.
So 99 is me. And this time I can use my local credentials because that's me. And I've got the choice here of fixed or dynamic.
Need to extend the path.
To VM, I believe. And it's going through. It did a couple of checks. There's a warning there. Video memory configured on the guest is greater than 4 megs. And it'll be limited to 4. Not a big deal. We're not planning to do anything video intensive on there. So anyway, the rest of this has all come out. And if I click finish, it'll start the conversion. I'm going to hold off on that because I want to show some other things here. But that's all it takes.
So that's end-to-end with MVMC.
Right.
If you were doing a small number of virtual machines,
exactly,
just a couple of clicks through for each VM, the biggest time it's going to take is that disk conversion. You know, if you've got big virtual disks on VMware, big VMDKs, it's going to take a while to convert. Having some local SSDs may speed it up on your conversion machine, but like Mark said, it's the copying across the network to the converting machine, then it's the conversion, and then it's moving it onto the Hyper-V machine. So there's a series of quite long steps there that the system has to perform that's going to take a little bit of time.
But that's if we're moving a couple of VMs.
Yeah, exactly. That's
what if you have
a
couple of 100 VMs?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a question.
The temp space needed for conversion.
Yes.
Will that need to be double the size of
Yes.
the disk you're converting?
Yes.
Great point, yeah. So it would be, yes, because it will bring in the disk from the VMDK over, and as it's converting it, it will need the extra space
Right.
to handle that. So yeah, there's going to be a little bit of disk space needed there, but yeah, great point, thanks for that. So, what if you want this to, as the little icon suggests, scale? I raided the icon bins for that. It took me a long time. Because MVMC on its own is only going to give you that click, 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 click experience, and then you're going to wait, and then you're going to move on to the next one. And that's going to take time. How can we start to use that tool, that engine, but use it in a more intelligent way to help you scale to converting as many or a lot more VMs simultaneously? And that's where the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter Automation Toolkit comes in.
If we can only
possibly
the
longest product name. So why do we need Matt? Something I hear far too much from my manager. But in this case, it's simple. To scale MVMC conversions, we just want the MVMC Automation Toolkit to help us scale things out. And we do that because that only gives us one VM at a time. The inbox solution, the standalone product, just gives us one at a time. And that's not enough for customers who want to move 500 VMs. You know, move one a day or maybe one every couple of hours. That's going to take a long time. But we can scale that with Matt. Because Matt is essentially a collection of PowerShell scripts that help to automate conversion using the engine of MVMC. So we wrapper it with this toolkit that my good friend Mark here has built to help us scale this out. Okay, so I'll let you walk us through.
Okay, so we'll talk about the architecture of this for a second. So, right, this is just a series of PowerShell scripts and one XML file. And anybody here familiar with the PDT? The
PowerShell Deployment
Toolkit? Well, it's someone from my team built that as well, so there's some of the same concepts in there. But yeah, the idea was because MVMC provides an exe, and what the exe does is the actual conversion bit in the middle, we can automate that by providing it, just keep pumping the correct parameters into it and waiting for the results. So what we do is the Matt has to take over a few things that the MVMC UI did, like talking to vSphere, figuring out what sort of VMs, or ESX or whatever, what sort of VMs are on the VMware side, which ones are compatible, and all that. So the first thing we do with Matt is PowerCLI, so it relies on PowerCLI for this connection. It goes out and it does a collection, figures out how many VMs are out there, and of those VMs, which ones are applicable to MVMC's core engine. And it does all that, and it stores it in a SQL server. So this can be SQL Express. If you've already got SQL installed, you can use whatever version of SQL. That wouldn't make any difference.
So you would manually install that as part of the installation of Matt, yeah?
Yeah, so at worst case, if you don't have any, you can go get the free version of SQL, and you're up and running. And the reason for this is because in our experience over the last couple of years of doing this, most large conversions don't happen overnight, right? They take weeks, months sometimes to finish. And so we want a persistent store for this over time, and SQL seems like an excellent choice for that, given all the things that it can do. even though we're using that much of it. It's just a little tiny bit. Anyway, so the first thing that we'll do is we'll collect that. We basically store it in a temp table. Then we scour the temp table, make sure everybody's compatible, and then we write that out to a final table. And what you can do, and we'll walk through this, is you spit that table out to a text file. When my boss asked me to build this, because I built a couple of other conversion things in the past, even though I'm not a developer, he said, do this without a UI. And I said, but why? That would make it so much easier. And because we're a very small team and because I'm the only person involved in developing it, I was like, okay, I can make that work. So what we did to make this simple and kind of work everywhere in the world without having to worry about localization and everything is we just spit out a text file. And the text file has all the VMs that you have in it. So every VM that qualified gets spit into this text file. And what you want to do is shorten that list to how many you intend to convert in this kind of batch. So right now I want to do 5 or 10 or 20.
And you could use the info from the map assessment that you did
right,
before
to help you figure out
kind of say,
where to
these
start.
are the 5 that I'm going to do as part of this batch, or these are the 10, or these are the low-hanging fruit that I'm going to re-virtualize on Hyper-V.
Yep, so if you know how to use Notepad, you're good to go. Just shrink the list down to what you think is appropriate for the batch that you want to convert, and then basically write that back to the database. Once it's back in the database, then we actually fire off the conversion, and the conversion, again, is that mbmc.exe, and that does the middle part. So it does the removal of VMware tools, the disk geometry conversions, and that sort of thing. What it didn't do was this outer lying layer of management. So again, PowerShell calling mbmc, and that'll convert it. You'll end up on Hyper-V. One of the nice things about this is the way it's written, you can do more than one conversion at the same time, which the UI will not let you do. So I can run, the guidance we give is 3 per control machine in this case, or whatever. The machine that's doing the conversion, 3 of those at once is the guidance that we give. But if you feel like I want to get through more than 3 at once, you can add what we call helper machines. And helper machines are basically a machine that has the exe and the PowerShell script on it. We make a remote task manager call to say, hey, start my script up, and it'll run. And in that case, instead of doing 3 at once, now I can do 12 at once.
In this configuration?
Right, with 4 there, yeah.
So in theory, you could add more helpers and just scale this out. If each helper is going to do 3, you could scale this out.
And obviously, there's going to be some constraints around scale because right now, all 12 of those would be landing on one Hyper-V server. So I might be bound on some network traffic or whatever at that scale because that's a lot of VMs showing up all at once. But generally speaking, you could, normally conversions are going to go host to host. So one ESX host equals one Hyper-V host kind of in the end, right? However many we're holding here, we're going to end up holding there. But anyway, in terms of getting it done quickly, you can do that quite quickly with this tool.
So just to clarify in terms of what I'm actually needing to install in this area, on the control machine, I'm putting the MBMC installer and SQL Express, if I've not already got SQL.
And PowerCLI.
Yep, and on the helpers, I'm installing MBMC again.
MBMC
in each
again.
individual helper.
MBMC and then the scripts.
Yeah, and that's it.
That's it.
Okay, so no SQL or anything required on the helpers?
Nope.
Good.
No PowerShell
or
no PowerCLI. So let me give you a walkthrough of that just to kind of see. If you like, command prompts, watch out. It's all going to be command prompts from here. Oops. Oh, yes. I wanted to kill you. Sorry. So I started one when we were in the speaker room a while. Has everyone read that? Just make sure. All right. Don't want to bust anyone out. Just finish reading that. So I started these while we were in the speaker room a little more than about an hour ago. So they're still in there. And this is just a loop I've got running to watch them. But the process will look something like this. So again, not a developer. So the main SQL or PowerShell script is called main. And you start it up. And then it asks you to do a couple things. So one of them is to collect VMs. Like I said, that first step where we got to go out and interrogate the other side. Now, if I were to hit, am I going to hurt anything? No, I won't hurt anything. So I'll go ahead and start a collection here just while we're talking about it. It's going to go out and get that information. Now, where is it getting it from? How did it know what to talk to? So we have an XML file in that. So there it is, variable.xml. So all the PowerShell scripts are going to read from here, and I'll open up the one that doesn't have my actual information in it. And that's what it looks like. So there's a general section, a scheduler credential section, a Hyper-V section, a VMware section, and then remotes if you want to use remotes. So this is where you put in which Hyper-V server and all that kind of stuff. And all of the processes are going to read from that. So that's how we managed to get through, apparently, through the collection successfully. So once I've collected data, my database has been populated, I want to manage the actual list. So I'm going to go ahead and create a list. It notices there's already one there, so I'm going to wipe it out and let it restart. So, all right, you can see all the machines that got added to my list. So this is the step where I said, if you know how to use Notepad, that's all you need to know. So here I'm going to just chop this down to maybe 4 VMs or something. Not too many. And let's say that I want them in a particular order, so I can also, it'll respect the order that you put them in here, so the one at the top is going to go first, and so on. So just save that back off, close it, and then pop back over to PowerShell. At this point, the list has been created. I can update the database based on the list. Those 4 items were added, and I can also double check it by just displaying it, make sure that they're still there. Okay, everybody's where I want them to be. Go back to the main menu and just hit Convert C. And now I can walk away. So the 3 that finished earlier are still in there, and once they're older than about an hour after completion time, they'll fall out. But what we're going to do here is go through now and check the logic around the server to make sure that we don't exceed the 3 that we set as the maximum. So you see there were 4 that were found, so one of these should get queued, and the other 3 should get converted.
So to clarify, you're doing this on the control machine?
This is on the control machine in this case, yeah.
So you're not using any helpers in this case?
I have not used any helpers in this situation, right. I certainly could, but yeah.
You would have added them to the XML file at the bottom section.
Right, and then we'd have 9 to keep track of, which is maybe more than we care to monitor at any given moment. So there we go. So one of them is unable to monitor the log, which is okay. That's not going to stop anything. What's curious about this PowerShell scripts or set of scripts is that it's wrapping an exe that wasn't really meant to do any of these things. The exe spits out a log file called mvmc.log, and if you run 2 of them, it was never meant to. It creates an mvmc1.log and an mvmc2.log and all that, and that's the only place that there's data being written out. If you were watching the command prompt, there's no results coming back. So you start it at the mvmc.exe / and all the options that you want, hit return, and then it'll just sit there until it's done. So if you're trying to pump out std out, there's no standard output. So I figured the way to do this was just to monitor those logs and scoop them up for data. So even though that one says it's not able to monitor the log, it's still going to go ahead and convert. We just won't be able to see what stage it's at. And again, that's all stuff that the PowerShell script is doing, is looking at the log and going, well, you look like you're at stage 1 preparing the VM, and then now you're at stage 2 copying and all that. So you can sit here basically while this runs, or you can go away and not care about it. But this is basically as much of a UI as Matt has, is this is it right here.
But if you had a list of 20 VMs, it's just going to go through them. Once one finishes, add the next, add the next, add the next. Yeah. So you could leave it to run if you did want to do that.
Right. And the thing, again, you need to be aware of is that these are cold migrations. And so for the most part, the customers that we deal with tend to do this in a window. And so they want to make sure that they're doing a reasonable amount so that they can complete during that window. If for some reason it's, we're running, this is the screen we're looking at, and we're like, oh, look, it's 9 a.m. and people are going to start logging in. I need these VMs back online, so I have to kill this. You'll notice the 3rd column there is PID. So I know what the process IDs are of all these, so if you have to kill them, it's right in front of you. You can just task kill those and start over.
Yeah, so, and you would just go back and start the source VM back up and start again. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of layers here. There's also, I'll let that run for a second. There's also a couple other things I'm just going to show off here. So let's get over to Matt. And I just completed a very large document on doing this. So this is all freely available. The downloads are on TechNet. The how to use them are kind of on my blog. But I've also just completed a 42-page doc on exactly how all the tables work, how all the scripts work. I mean, just start to finish, everything you'd want to know about it.
Yeah.
But one of the things that it has built in is a basic help. So here's all the things that it supports. So aside from just converting, which is nice, it does that status loop that you see running over here. So if I just want to kind of see where things are, I could just run show status or show status loop, and it would loop through them. I can also do some things around managing my list. So the idea here was I don't know anything about SQL. I don't want to know anything about SQL. I run a .SQL script at the beginning, and then I don't ever have to open SQL. So I can reset the lists. I can reset the tables, all that stuff. I can purge the database, all from options within the PowerShell script. And the other thing we have here is reporting. So you see report all, report complete, incomplete, and unsupported. So much like you were getting from the
map.
The map.
Yeah.
Get the right last letter there. Yeah, the map. This kind of gives you that too. It also gives you progress reports. So if you're 2 weeks into an 8-week thing, you can run report complete and report incomplete and kind of look at them, or the all, and kind of get a report card of how far we got to go and all that. So it's intended to be incredibly flexible. That's why it's written in PowerShell. You can take it, you can do anything you want with it. So if you want to add a process at the end here, it's documented where to add it, extend it in any way that you see fit. And I spent last night, instead of hanging out on Bourbon Street or Canal Street or wherever I was supposed to be, I was working with someone in New Zealand who was using the mat, and they had some suggestions, and so we were working through things, and it's really meant to be community driven. The reason it's all PowerShell script and it's out there is that you can have it, take it, consume it, do whatever you want with it, make it yours, and then tell me what you did so other people can do that. Exactly. Because again, I'm not a developer. I kind of got dropped in this, and I've been able to work my way through all this over the course of a couple years. But certainly people out there have better ideas than we do, and we can incorporate that moving forward. Community generates good stuff.
Yep. So we're good on the demo?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool, thanks. So what is it all about? What is it in essence? What is the MVMC Automation Toolkit? What are we seeing? Well, it's free, so we pull that down, and you've got the links to grab it from the web, and the blog is going to help you understand how it all fits together architecturally and how the process flows. But as Mark said, the documentation that is going to be rich and detailed, if you do want to understand really nitty-gritty nuts and bolts, you're going to be able to see that information as well very soon. The free version of SQL is what we can use if you just want to keep this very low cost, if you've not already got a SQL that you can use for this process. But as Mark said, it's a very lightweight use of SQL, so it's not going to impact the performance of any existing SQL that may be already highly utilized. Yeah. Multiple concurrent conversions per server. So you can set those instances on that control machine, that local one we were using in Mark's example, but also on the remote machines, the helpers, we can also have multiple instances running there as well. So it will scale in threes as you grow the number of helper machines. And there's reporting, it's extensible. We want you to use it and feedback and improve it for your own usage and for the use of others. But before we wrap up in a summary, these are just some of the Microsoft tools that we've talked about. VMM with its V2V. We touched on P2V. We looked at the MVMC and enhancing it with the automation toolkit. We looked at MAP for the assessment. But what are some of the other guys doing? What are some of our partners doing that you could make use of their tools? Partners like Five9, who not only do some cool stuff around Hyper-V and the network switch, but they also do a V2V converter that's free. So you could use that if you don't want to use MVMC. That's fine. There are companies like DoubleTake or Vision Solutions with DoubleTake Move, which will provide more than a warm conversion because the VMs are running for a much longer period of time and the conversion is taking place whilst the VM is running. And it's only really at the end when the blocks kind of get changed over that there's an element of downtime. However, that does require an agent inside the guest, whereas this doesn't. So something to be aware of if you've got restrictions in that way. But Vision Solutions are here at the conference, so go and chat to them on their booth if you want to understand what they can offer.
Yeah, I mean, I've dealt with a number of service providers who have what I thought were ridiculous service windows, in the 15-minute increment, the tools we have just can't operate successfully in that. Just moving the disks is going to take long. If you get a 20-gig disk, or you might squeeze it in, but a half a terabyte, it's just never going to happen.
Exactly.
So warm was certainly the way to go for them, and that's as close as I think we're ever going to get to. I don't think you're ever going to be able to pass a VM from VMware
like a vMotion to live migration
while
conversion.
It's running.
And that would be awesome.
In the cards.
Get to work. Come on. Yeah. But that's the kind of thing that we want to provide a different set of tools that's going to be right to fit your environment. But as Mark was alluding to there, the conversion time isn't the config file of the VM. It's just XML on the Hyper-V side. It's a VMware config file on their side. It's just a descriptor. It's metadata, if you will. That's like that to convert. We need to provide solutions to more quickly convert the disks, because that's the time-consuming process. Getting that disk across the wire to the converter, doing the conversion, and shipping it to the Hyper-V machine. How many people in the audience, just out of interest, are running vSphere? Okay, yep, great, excellent. Hands down. How many people are running NetApp storage in the audience? Okay, a few. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, because I want to show you what NetApp are doing in this space.
Say, if only the storage people who had those files could do something with them.
Yeah, if only the storage team who could accelerate disk-related stuff could provide more value. And that's exactly what NetApp have done. So NetApp provides something that's freely available to their customers called the PowerShell Toolkit, the Data on Tap PowerShell Toolkit. Version 2.3 had the functionality that I'm going to show you very shortly. 2.4 is now available as well, which also includes the same functionality. And what you see here is something that will be familiar to everybody who put their hands up the first time, which is vSphere, the vSphere client running the latest version, 5.1, pointing at a number of VMs on a particular host. So we may be going direct here. We don't need vCenter. In this case, it's the vSphere client pointing directly at that ESXi host. So no system center requirement, which is great if you've not got that investment at this time. And I've got a video for this. I'm not hooked into NetApp's system live, but it will help us do this quickly because there's certain bits that need speeding up. But we're going to select a number of VMs to convert, and you saw a big, long list. Now they're in Hyper-V, and they've got a share window where stuff is going to reside when it gets moved over. And they're going to run a script that they've built that if you go and talk to them at their stand, they will talk to you about, and they'll show you how this all works and explain. So this script's going to connect to ESX, or connect to the host directly, connect to the FAS that the VMs are stored on, and it's going to start to connect to the VMs. And they've created a GUI that you can select all the VMs that you're interested in PowerShell, so a nice PowerShell GUI, lightweight, and they'll click OK. And you'll see that it's starting to create the VM config file on Hyper-V, and now it's doing the conversion of the VMDK to VHDX. Key things are here. It's not requiring any more space. No more space whatsoever. All they're doing on the storage is they're flipping the header from a VMware suitable header to one that's suitable with Microsoft. Because the container of the disk is essentially the same. It's like a zip file. It's just a disk container. You just have to get the headers lined up. But you'll see now they are converting 40 gig fixed virtual disks, VMDKs, in less than 20 seconds per disk. No extra disk space. Nothing else is used, and it's doing it like that. Does it remove VMware tools? No. So we have to work on improving that little bit of the process, something you might want to do in advance. Does it sort out all the network adapters and stuff on the other side? To a degree, but there might be a little bit of extra work you need to do at the other side with the config file. But you could factor that into a PowerShell script. But this is phenomenal stuff. It is migrating VMs like that.
Yeah, what takes my tool 20 minutes takes their tool 20 seconds. I mean, it's that level of difference.
And they're bringing it up on the target host now on Hyper-V. So it's doing it all at the block level, and now it's started on Hyper-V for the first time. Obviously, it's going to need a reboot as a guest to pick up all of the new hardware that it's now running on, in this case, moving from VMware to Hyper-V. But that's a phenomenal example of a partner who's delivering that kind of innovation, utilizing their IP and their storage technology. So, we do some stuff. We do some conversion tools and make them broadly available. NetApp and other vendors are doing some cool stuff on the storage layer as well. So, go and see those guys at the booth, and they'll walk you through this and give you all of the nitty-gritty storage-related cool stuff about that. So, yeah, awesome stuff. Okay? So, to wrap up now properly with the summary. What have we talked about? Well, we've gone nuts on acronyms. MAP, Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit. MVMC, the converter that we provide, the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter. The MAT, the MVMC Automation Toolkit, which is actually a very rare nested acronym within an acronym. So yeah, you don't see that too often, but we've nailed it. And some others, VMM, Virtual Machine Manager. It provides V2V, it provides P2V capability as well. So some things just to be aware of. But people are migrating for lots of different reasons. Cost, management control, automation, integration with other tools. We want to make multiple options available. So yeah, you could use VMM, you could wrapper it with Orchestrator and do some cool stuff there with the System Center tools. But if you want something that's free and you just want to move a couple of VMs, MVMC is a great way to do that. But it does have some limitations. It won't do Linux, for instance. It won't migrate 2012 as a guest OS. And it won't support vSphere 5.1 at this time. But if you want to convert and scale that out, then you're good to go with the MVMC Automation Toolkit or the MAT. So that will accelerate, it'll scale, it's easy to deploy, and with the documentation and the guidance on the blogs, you're going to be able to learn how to do it very, very quickly.
Yeah, and I'll just plug the blog there. It's aka.ms/buildingclouds.
Yeah,
That'll resolve to something much longer, but that's the easy one.
There's a tag on the right-hand side of the blog where you can filter just by migration if you're looking specifically for the kind of posts that Mark's been putting out there as well. So very easy to find the information and start to consume. And that'll have guidance on how you download the mat and how you go and grab the MVMC itself as well. So all useful stuff. So with that, there are a number of related sessions around just Hyper-V, and there's no other migration-related sessions per se, but there's other stuff going on this week around Hyper-V and the comparison session that I did yesterday, now on demand, and there's one tomorrow on the private cloud stuff with myself as well. So if you can make it, great. I'd love to see you there. And yeah, track resources, great. Loads of stuff on Windows Server. If you hadn't heard, we've kind of announced Windows Server 2012 R2. Looks pretty good between you and I, and System Center 2012 R2 as well. But the main thing to take away as well, you've got the tools, you've got a bit more knowledge about them now as well, and we really appreciate you spending the time with us now. So enjoy your evening, and we'll hopefully see you again. So thank you very much.
Thanks.